This week in Post, your photography questions answered. We have a Q&A episode. Hi everyone, I'm Scott Davenport and welcome to In Post. Thanks for joining me today. It's a Q&A episode, so I'm getting great questions over the course of the last few weeks. Grabbed a few of them to talk about here in this video. If you've got a photography question, you can contact me directly through my website, comments on the video, a variety of social media platforms out there. I want to say one thing though, if you've been sending emails, and double check that your email address is correct. With the contact form on my website, sometimes I get emails and I can't respond. I try to send a message back to you, give you an answer, and the email bounces, or sometimes the internet provider says one thing or another, doesn't let that mail get through. So if you have asked a question to me and you haven't received a response, try something different. Either double check your email address or maybe leave a comment in the video, and that way I'll be able to respond and you can get some info. So with that, let's get to our questions. Rick via YouTube asked about transforming photos in ON1 Photo Raw. So back in episode 267, I was doing some transform experiments in Lightroom to figure out if where we do transform, guided transforms, that matter. They asked, well, what can we do in ON1? If I'm an ON1 user, how can I do transforms there? So I'm going to take a look at that same photo. This is the photo I used back in episode 267. So for doing transforms in Photo Raw, we have a couple of things available to us. We have lens corrections, and we also have the transform tool itself. Lens corrections get turned on automatically, and that's our typical barrel distortion and bowing and so forth. We do have the manual controls though, so this will control your barrel distortion, right? So sometimes, in this case, I have these pilings that are a little bit leaning there. We can play with this slightly to get some level of additional straightening there. Fall off and color fringe, those really aren't going to help you with alignment of things. That's more for the vignetting and chromatic aberration. But for the transform tool, we have a few things. Now, admittedly, this is not as feature rich as a guided option in Lightroom, and I think under the covers it's doing some type of warp technology. I have my fingers crossed this is going to come into ON1. They just teased something they were doing with panorama stitching and some boundary warping type technology. Maybe that'll work its way into the transform tool. But until we know that for sure, what do we have available to us? We have vertical, which is going to tilt things up and down. This is more if you're looking up at a building. But you can see as I tilt this downward, I'm getting these pilings to be more straight. We have horizontal, we can do the same thing there, right? And then we have rotation. And like any transform tool, once I start doing these types of things, I'm going to lose some information. So that's where scale comes in. We can scale up and down to kind of, fundamentally auto crop. You can either crop or you can do the scale. And I tend to do the scaling right here in the tool. So for this photo, I'd probably want to really focus on this center piling. That needs to be nice and straight. So the vertical was helping a little bit, and then a little bit of rotation. Rotation can be sometimes tough to control because you're using a slider, but you can always type in a value. And so maybe for this one, I'll try 0.8 or something like that, just a tiny nudge there. And then I can scale this up. And that's looking much better. So, before and after. And like any type of transform, we're going to lose information around the sides, right? As soon as we start warping it, or, in this case, the vertical transformation was the big one, there's going to be dead space. Now you can either do the scaling like I did. You could also bring it into layers and do some content aware or a perfect eraser to try to rebuild some of those areas. So there are some other options there if you really need to keep some of that surround on the outside of your images. So Rick, I hope that helps you out. David on Twitter asked me, hey Scott, what do you think about Affinity Pro as a replacement for Photoshop? So as I told David directly as soon as he asked this, the short answer is don't really know. Affinity Pro seems to be very capable. I've not used it, and the reason for that isn't because I'm a negative on Affinity Pro or I love Photoshop. It's simply I just don't use Photoshop very often at all. Self-admittedly the worst Photoshop user on the planet. For me, Photoshop is a 3-trick pony. There's 3 things that I have used it for that I couldn't do anywhere else. The first was stitching panoramas together. Well, guess what? Lightroom can do that now. I don't use Photoshop to do that anymore. The second is focus stacking, so I'll still use it for that. And the third is transform warp. It can do some interesting things where you really want to have more control over what ON1 or Lightroom or other packages give you in terms of straightening out angles, or crafting specialized shapes, or sometimes even playing games with composition to move objects closer without doing like cloning and stamping. And it's a very specialty use. So I can't give you a good affirmation that Affinity Pro can replace Photoshop. From what I've heard from other photographers that use it, it's a very capable tool. I'm going to guess they have a free trial and it's worth trying out. But also ask yourself, if you're heavy into Photoshop already, well, maybe it's something you want to look at because financially maybe it makes more sense. If you're not heavy into Photoshop, ask yourself the fundamental question: what problem am I trying to solve? And if that problem can be solved by Affinity Pro or another package, maybe you want to look at that. For me, when I reached a point in my photography that I needed layers, I got to the stage where I need to be able to blend some exposures together, or I want to be able to use the blending modes to do cityscape work or whatever it might be. At that time, Photoshop was still a multi-$100 package, and I didn't have that money. ON1 was an offering that was much more affordable and had layers, so that was the solution to my problem. And since then, I just haven't gotten to the stage where there's something I really need to do that Photoshop offers that I haven't been able to do in something else. I have Photoshop, part of Creative Cloud. I just rarely open it. So David, I hope that helps you in some sense. And if you do end up choosing Affinity Pro or so forth, let us know what you think, because it'd be good to hear about that. And I'm always looking to learn from other photographers. One more question from Alan came in through email, and he asked about printing and print ratios. So the question kind of went along the lines of, our cameras capture things in 2x3 or 3x2, depending on the orientation you're shooting in. That's the size of a lot of our sensors. But our prints are 8x10 or 16x20, and the print ratios don't match. So, what do I do about this? Well, there's a couple of things. Good news is, because so many cameras capture things in a 2x3 or 3x2 ratio, we have a lot of print options for that. 16x24 is a perfect match for that. So if you've gotten your composition set exactly how you want it and don't want to have to lose information, well, you can print, and there is going to be a paper or a canvas that will match the aspect ratio that you have for your camera. Otherwise, you're left with cropping. And I thought I'd show you a simple example here of, so I've got this photo here. This is a 3x2 ratio. If I bring this into the print module, and right now I have an 8x10 selected, well, I'm left with having to choose something. I'm going to either, keep information here and lose it on this edge, or I'm going to keep information here and lose the edge of the C. And where I had these people situated in the frame, I'm having to make a trade-off. I'm going to lose information. When I'm printing archival prints, I don't necessarily care too much, but I have a different template that I can use as well. I have this other one, 3x2, and it just creates a little border, and it gives me a place to put a little bit of text. I'm getting the full image. And this might be something you would see in a gallery, right? You've got some type of border on it, and maybe you're going to put a label underneath it that says what this is, or the title of the image, the date, whatever it might be. Hopefully your name. So Alan, at the end of the day, there are plenty of options to print at the aspect ratio that you want, and I think you also find frames and paper sizes that'll perfectly match. And if not, well, you can either do more like an archival gallery print with a border, add some information to it. You can always trim the photo afterward, although, framing might maybe not get too interesting, because you can always matte things and make the matte work for you. But I think because of the proliferation of the 2x3, 3x2 ratio, it's become less of a problem. We don't have to be confined to the classic 8x10s and 5x7s that many of us grew up with. That's going to do it for this week's In Post video. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you liked the Q&A. And if you did, share this with a friend. Tell your camera club or your shooting buddy about the channel. Have them join our little corner of the internet. And if you've got photo questions, send them on in. You won't have to wait around for another video to get an answer. I usually turn them around in a day or two at most. And until next time, my name is Scott Davenport, and happy shooting.